I've been playtesting the revolutionary Enchanted role-playing game, and there are many things to learn. Most of it is very positive and wonderful, but there is one thing that I need to think about. I'm Will from Enchanted ESL, and I've designed a tabletop role-playing game specifically for teaching English. If that's a new concept to you, I highly recommend checking out the previous videos in this series. In the first one, I go over the whole idea of what a role-playing game is and how I designed this one. And then in the second and third videos, I explain how to play and how to get the best out of them in your classes. Today, I'm reporting what happened when I started playing the game a couple of weeks ago with some of my private classes. First of all, I'll talk about the groups themselves, then go into introducing the game and character creation, and then talk about the one big thing that I would change. So I've been testing with 3 groups. Let's call them groups A, B, and C. Group A is made up of 4 upper high schoolers, about 15 to 16 years old. Most of them have played this game extensively with me before, so they know what they're getting into. Group B also has 4 students, and they're about 12 years old. They've just started high school. At the end of last year, we briefly started playing Tales from the Loop, which is a very similar game to the one that I've made. In fact, it's one of my biggest inspirations. So they kind of know what this game is about, but they're not very experienced. In Group C, the students are about 12 years old as well, and there's 3 of them, and they have never played this kind of game before, at all. The first thing to do was introduce the concept of the game. Let them know the expectations and some of the very basic rules on how the dice work. Also, just a brief word on what the world is. So I had to tell them it was modern day, relatively realistic, but with a bit of magic and spookiness. With groups A and B, this wasn't really a problem. They'd played it before, they knew what they were getting into. With group C, I don't think they really got it. They don't know what to expect and they're a little resistant, and I'll get into more on that later. Next was character creation. Group A had no problems with this at all. They got straight into it and started making some really fun and unique characters. There were some quirks and some light-hearted things attached to their characters, but they were relatively standard teenagers. The drive and the problems started off a little tricky for them to think of, but once I gave them some examples, they quickly came up with their own. And I didn't tell them that the iconic item had a mechanical bonus to it. That's because I wanted them to come up with something that was appropriate for their character and not try to game the system. And they came up with some really fun ones. And assigning the skills was very easy and straightforward. They collaborated to make sure all of the skills were covered, but they took into account everybody's individual preferences. With Group B, the character creation was also fine. The names and the descriptions were very standard, except for one student who went a bit wild and wanted to be Doraemon with a robotic leg. For a moment, I debated whether to allow this or rein it in and make it more sensible. It was so silly compared to the other students that I thought it might stand out a bit, but ultimately it was what the student wants, so I allowed it. Nobody ever said the game had to be super serious and realistic. Again, once I gave them examples of the drives and the problems, they had no problem coming up with their own ones. And the iconic items mostly derived from that drive and that problem that they had just made. Skills were a little trickier because I think a few of them weren't exactly sure what some of them meant, like empathize and operate. Once again, I had to give them lots of examples of things they could do with those skills, and they began to get it. Now, making characters with Group C was a journey. We have a scarecrow cosplaying Stranger Things enthusiast. We have a potato with a pet sausage dog. And we have a melon who's very smelly and short-sighted. Oh, and all of them are over 100 years old. Their drives and problems are similarly wacky, and their skills weren't particularly coordinated, but it doesn't matter that much. Now, the silliness of the characters is fine. I don't really mind it, it's a bit of fun. But it does tell me that something deeper is going on. There's a more fundamental problem with how they're seeing the game. That is, they don't really know what it is when they're making their characters. They don't have something to aim for. Groups A and B had already played it a little bit, so they knew what was important and could frame their choices accordingly. But Group C had very little to work with. Yes, I explained them the concept of the game, but as they'd never done it, it wasn't really internalized. I think I fell too much into the standard thinking of somebody who plays role-playing games regularly. Recently, I've been learning a bunch of new RPGs like Dragonbane and Mörkborg, which are really fun and exciting, and the first thing I do is check out the basic rules and then create a character. But that's because I already know what a role-playing game is. I get the entire concept. But for someone who's never played one before, it's a completely new and unfamiliar experience. And thinking back on games that I've tried before that haven't gone particularly well, things did get a bit cloudy and confused in the character creation. Spending a whole bunch of time coming up with a character for a game that you don't know what it is a bit frustrating, and so it's hardly surprising that they started to lose a bit of interest and turn to silliness instead. So I've learned that just telling them what the game is not the same as them actually understanding it. As a result, it's now my opinion that students should play the game for a while before creating any character. And there are two ways of tackling this. The first is to give them pre-generated characters. They don't have to come up with their own, you just give them one. I actually did this with Group B when we started playing Tales from the Loop at the end of last year. They can choose from a selection and pick one that looks cool that they want to go with. And then they figure out the details as they go. They don't need to know what the drive and the problem and all of the skills are right from the beginning. They just choose a character and get playing. This is almost certainly the best strategy, and it doesn't take long to come up with some pre-generated characters. In fact, that's something I'll be focusing on doing to use with my future groups that play with, and I'll share them with you guys so you can use them as well. The second option is to start playing the game without any character sheet whatsoever and build a character as you go. This could be more immersive as things appear in gameplay. They decide their name and their skills and their background and whatever as they're playing, but it could be quite tricky and requires a certain type of student. I think that's probably beyond me and any of my classes at this point, but if you're with a particularly creative bunch, it could be fun. And of course, once students have played for a while with either a pre-generated character or one that appears out of the gameplay, they'll want to create their own one specifically designed for them. But at that point, they'll be much more motivated and informed, and they can make that character as best as possible. This is part of a wider point too, which is getting students playing the game as quickly as possible. Every moment spent learning a whole bunch of rules and coming up with a character is just sapping away at motivation and engagement. And if it's completely new to them and you're kind of telling them they have to play this game, they don't know whether it's going to be worthwhile paying attention and investing. So another thing I'm planning to come up with very quickly is a very simple beginner's adventure mystery. In this scenario, students and teachers will be able to get to grips with the game. They won't need to know all of the rules straight up. They don't need to make a whole character. They can start in a very structured way, learning the basic concepts and developing from there. And there'll be plenty of times for making meaningful choices and rolling some dice, because ultimately that's what the game is about. So, plenty to think about. And while I'm delighted the game is going brilliantly well with two of the groups, it is a bit frustrating that it hasn't particularly worked with one. But that's why I'm playtesting. The game and the implementation isn't perfect yet, and I'm learning so much already, and now I have a direction to move towards, which is really important. And when I say things are going well in the other groups, I mean really well. Group A especially are having a great time. They're learning so much English and enjoying the moment and really getting stuck in. They started a little bit ahead of the others, and they've already finished the first mystery, Bookshop Blast. Bookshop Blast is an introduction to the world and the town and the idea of the Whispering Veil, which is the strange force that will make the backbone of all of the future mysteries. You can learn about the town, the Whispering Veil, and how to run the Bookshop Blast mystery in my next video in the series, which is right here. But for now, I've been Will from Enchanted ESL, wishing you all the joy and success in your teaching. See ya!